Welcome to the podcast. Hey, this is a podcast that explores various aspects of addiction, intentionally focusing on personal stories of recovery, scientific perspectives, societal impacts, or related topics. This podcast often features discussions with experts, individuals in recovery, therapists, and advocates to offer insights and support to those affected by addiction or seeking more information about it. Welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Addiction. I am your host, Al Richards, and today we're going to be talking about the background of my life with our guest, Stone McDaniel. Stone, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be with us.
Yeah, thank you, Al. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I had to adjust my light. I noticed it was a little dark, so excuse me, everyone. I had to get a little bit more light on there. It was a little dark. You know, Stone, you and I chatted, I don't know, I can't even remember. It was a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago. I have a hard time keeping up with things sometimes with work and all the stuff going on. And you've lived quite an exciting life. And I think that's one of the reasons why we want to say, the background of your life. So would you share with our listeners a little bit what you mean by that and just share what you feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. I like we talked off camera. I think to give a good explanation as to like where my addiction came from, where my kind of trouble started. I had an interesting life growing up for sure. I had just nothing horrible per se. My parents were great, but I just had a lot of key things happen throughout my life that I think impacted me in a way that it led me towards addiction. So yeah, I thought it'd be a good idea to go back and talk about that before we get to where I'm at today. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I have found with the majority of the guests that have been on the show, it's what's happened to them. I mean, there's been a few that have had accidents, and surgeries and they got the painkillers, and before they knew it, they were addicted to opioids. However, I would say the majority had some type of trauma or something happened to them. And then it seems like right around that early age of puberty, like between 11 to
mhm.
13 or 14, all of a sudden things just completely change. Is that what happened with you?
Yeah, you almost hit the nail on the head there. That's very similar for sure.
Would you like to share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'll just kind of start off and give a background. I was born in Vegas. I grew up in Arkansas. Actually, my family moved out there when I was really young. I lived out there. Basically, I was raised by my mom, my grandparents, especially, and my stepdad, John. I I lived with my grandparents for the most part. My mom was going to school. She was working towards her degree in psychology. She was going to school full time. My stepdad was working for the fire department. He was going to school for his career. And my grandparent, my dad, he took off before I was even born. I never even knew the guy. And so he was not in the picture. And so my grandparents, they really stepped in and stepped up and helped raise me, right? I spent a lot of my time up at their house. And my grandmother, she homeschooled me for a lot of my schooling, from pretty much the like third grade on to high school. And so I spent a lot of time with her. Unfortunately, she had chronic lymphocytic leukemia. And so I spent a lot of my childhood in a cancer research center, actually, UCEMS, if I remember correctly, in Little Rock. And yeah, I basically with that, like I was in a hospital like, man, 8, 12, 14 hours a day, multiple days a week, doing my schooling there. And I think that because of that, I grew up, really fast. I mean, I had a great childhood. I, I played golf, I played piano, I played guitar. From an outside looking in, I think it looked like a great childhood, but it was definitely really different for sure. Um, and I had to grow up really fast, I think. And I felt like I felt the need that I had to take care of my grandmother. I had to help, with anything medically related to her. And everything was going really well for a while. It was fine. And then my mom actually, she got an offer, a great job opportunity out here in Utah. And she came to us and said, "Hey, I have this job opportunity. John, my stepdad, also has a great job opportunity." And we'd kind of be dumb not to take it. And also there's some really great schools. They were scouting out Juan Diego and Draper for me as a high school. And basically about that time, my grandmother, she had fought cancer for probably, I think, 11 or 12 years. And she started going really downhill health wise. We found out she developed acute myeloid bone leukemia. And she went downhill really quick after that. It was really fast. And during that time, so basically they had a choice to make, stay and help take care of her, or move out to Utah and get everything ready for me to move out there eventually whenever she passed. And they chose the latter. Um, and, at the time I had absolutely zero issue. I still don't have an issue with it. I'm glad they did it. I see, the reasoning they did it, and I hold nothing against them at all. I have to make that super clear. Me and my mom have talked about it, and I hold nothing against her. I understand why she did it, and I have, nothing bad to say about that whole situation. But yeah, so basically at that time, me and my grandfather stayed behind. Um, we helped take care of her, and I saw some things no 12-year-old should have to see with taking care of her. Some pretty traumatic things, I would help. Yeah, I don't want to go into too much detail to gross out anybody, and also for the respect of her, but just some things that no 12-year-old, should have to see for sure. Sorry, one second. Al, or honey, could you grab me a hoodie? It's really cold down here. Sorry about that, Al.
No worries.
And so basically the plan was set. They were going to move out there, and I was going to stay behind and help take care of her before she passed. And so that's what me and my grandfather did. And I think during that time, like, I did a lot of growing up, and there was a lot that it wasn't expected of me, but I wanted to step up to the plate and help however I could, for sure. So when she passed, it was pretty traumatic. I was right there. I was helping, give her CPR. Ran outside to help the paramedics, find where we were. And yeah, it was really surreal. It was pretty traumatizing, I guess, looking back at it as an adult. Um, but at the time, I didn't really process it. Now that I look back on it, I was just very emotionally uh, dull, I guess. I didn't cry at the time. I was sad for sure, but yeah, it was very. I felt like I had to step up and be there for my grandfather, and that's what I did. Um, yeah, I mean, it was rough, like, looking back on it for sure. So after she passed,
That's a lot of pressure though, Stone. I mean, as being a young man, I mean, really, you're just kind of getting into the young man state of life, and to be able to do what you did. I can understand how much pressure would be on you.
yeah, it definitely was. And I don't think that they, wanted to pressure me into doing anything for sure, like expected me, but like, I think they got so used to me just stepping up and being okay with it. And I think deep down, I don't think I was, right. Um, but yeah, after she passed, we basically had a big yard sale. We packed up the car, loaded up a U-Haul, and me and my dad. I call him my dad, by the way, my grandfather. I've always called him my dad. Um, Me and my dad, we moved out. We drove across country, moved out, and he got a place out there. And my mom asked me, one of the first things she asked me, excuse me, let me put this on. It's
Okay.
freezing in this basement. I apologize.
No worries.
Okay. One of the things she asked me, I remember, was like, who do you want to live? Do you want to live with me, or do you want to live with your dad? And immediately, I had to be there for him. We were best friends for sure. I didn't want him to be alone in that house. So I moved in with him for sure. And I think, we'll get to it here in a little bit, but I think that was kind of a big mistake on my part. Um, I think it ended up giving me a lot of free reign. And for the first time in my life, I grew up in Like I said, I grew up around them all the time. I was always golfing, always playing the piano, archery, rifles, whatever. But it was always, up at their house, no other kids around, no freedom, right? Um, and so I think when we moved here, first time in a big city, I started like high school and stuff. I got a taste of freedom, and I think that's kind of where things started to go downhill because I was so overwhelmed all the time. Um, yeah, and I think that freedom really was just different to me, and I took it and I kind of ran wild with it. Um, so yeah, I moved in with him. I started high school at Juan Diego, and I absolutely hated it there. I didn't like the private school at all. It was again more. I got a little taste of freedom, and it was more pressure, more expecting like, here's what we want you to do, and I kind of rebelled against that. I dealt with bullying a lot there because I just didn't really fit in. I didn't know how kids acted, because I was homeschooled, and so I kind of stood out, and I got picked on a lot for it for sure. Um, let's see. I guess like during that time, I started kind of experimenting with weed here and there. Nothing crazy yet. I'd sneak out and I'd smoke with the few friends that I did have. We'd start smoking, and I think that got me more comfortable with the idea of like kind of being high and that kind of thing. And so, over time, just growing up, getting more bold, going out to parties, drinking. Um, yeah, I think that's kind of where what led into my drug use. I got a taste of that freedom to like do what I want to. And then I think with my grandfather, he felt really guilty about uh, dealing with my grandmother. And he kind of just like he kind of gave me free reign. He's like he's grown up, he's a big boy, he's not dumb. I'm gonna let him do what he wants to do. And I think that was a big mistake on his part, looking back as an adult. Because I think he knew kind of the direction I was heading, but he just felt bad and he wanted to let me do my own thing, right? So down the road a little bit, I'm like a senior in high school. I finally convinced my parents to leave Juan Diego. I go to a school called Summit Academy. It's kind of it's a semi-private school. What are they called? Charter school. And there I just kind of ran wild. I started, selling weed. I was like the, weed dealer at the school. Um, and yeah, just really doing whatever I wanted. Parties, started around that time, experimenting with like Adderall and Vyvanse. Really loved that. I was a huge gamer throughout all this, and so that the one thing I loved about it is it gave me an edge with like video games and stuff, and so I really loved that. And it was great to go out and party and be able to stay up all night with my friends, and so yeah, I was selling weed. I had a lot of money, a lot of freedom, and I think that's really started getting to me. And yeah, it just went to my head, I guess, and I kind of started getting the attitude that I'm going to do whatever I want to do, how I'm going to do it. And unfortunately, I was able to hide it decently well from my mom. She was still very much in the picture. She'd come over all the time, but I always told her like, no, I'm okay. I'm staying with dad. It's what I want to do. And, I want to take care of him. Um, and yeah, so, and I know I'm kind of going fast through all this, but about that time, uh, I had a friend. I won't say his name out of his privacy, but I had a friend. He was also a gamer, and I guess it was hard for him to find Adderall and Vyvanse, and so he knew somebody that had meth, and so he actually we went over the I went over to his house to play some video games one night, and he basically introduced me to it, and immediately I fell in love. Absolutely loved it, loved everything about it. Um, and I guess that was kind of my first introduction to a really hard drug. It just really went well with my lifestyle at the time. Um, yeah, and so I kept doing the same thing for a while, kind of kept floating through life. Um, yeah, just
So was the heroin like the everyday use then? It just got to that point where it was every day? Because I remember for me,
The meth you mean,
or
or
the meth, yeah, excuse me, the meth, because it was for me with cocaine. I smoked a little pot a couple weeks before I graduated from high school, and then started smoking it because I worked construction, and everybody that worked construction, at least all the guys I worked construction with, we all smoked pot. That was just part of it. And then I got transferred to Colorado, and I remember the first time I tried a line of cocaine, and I was in heaven. That same thing. I mean, I just fell in love with it immediately. And however, it was something that I did only every once in a great while, and it took way, way long time into my life before really I was doing it again. But that part of my life, it's when it really took over, and I was doing it every single Friday and Saturday night, and I did it for that way for 8 years straight. Was yours kind of a step here and then a step there, or was he immediately right into it?
so it was probably quicker than most, I'd say, to everyday use because I had already been doing Adderall and Vyvanse in large amounts, every other day on the weekends. Eventually, if I had to guess, I was getting into it every single day. And so when I tried the meth, and I was like, oh, it's cheap, it's better, it's stronger. Yeah, I think at first it was, here and there, but it very quickly started getting to the point where it was every single day. I was, at the time when I very first started doing the meth, I was actually on the golf team, and it started getting in the way of practice. I mean, I'd show up and my joints would be stiff and I couldn't golf, and I'd just say, screw it, I'm going home. And that eventually led me to quitting because I liked that more than like the meth more than golf, right? So yeah, it definitely happened very quickly for sure to where it was everyday use.
Yeah. And when that started, because I mean that's really when your life probably, I'm just guessing here, really started taking a turn in a totally different direction.
So I had a false sense of security because I had a lot of money from selling weed. I had a lot of nice things. My grandfather, again, he kind of spoiled me. He did spoil me. He, went out, bought my first car. It was a Dodge Charger, and then sold it and got us another sports car. He got me another sports car, right? Subaru STI or something. Super cool at the time. So I had like this false sense of security that everything was okay. And honestly, it was, as far as like looking from the outside in, it definitely was okay for a very long period of time. And I think it gave me this false sense of like, I'm better than this drug. I can beat this. Like, I don't understand what everybody's talking about. Everything's great. I got, $20,000 in my safe right here. I got a nice car. I have a beautiful girlfriend. Um, Everything's going great. But yeah.
Yeah. So really all the pain and all the suffering you said from the outside in, but really inside, there was a lot of things boiling inside there. A lot of things was changing.
Absolutely. I think so. And at the time, I was completely clueless to it. Heck, even way later in my addiction, I had a kind of an idea, but I didn't figure that stuff out like until I was in treatment and realized that that stuff was there at that time. So yeah, you're definitely right.
Yeah. Did you find out around that time when you got into treatment how much you was actually holding in? Because to be vulnerable here myself, and a lot of our regular listeners have heard me say this, but when I started this podcast over 3 years ago, a lot of it was started due to my wife's alcoholism, or ex-wife's alcoholism. And I lost a career of 24 years because of a failed UA, because it came back positive for cocaine, and I hadn't been drug tested in 15 years. But it was my
Mhm.
weekend release, right? I worked a lot of hours and was dedicated to my job. But on Friday and Saturday, man, it was party time. It was time to release. And when I first shared it on my show in January of 2023 was the first time I actually shared it. Or was it 2022? Heck, I can't remember. It goes by so quick. Uh, I actually had my guest co-host who was coming on the show. We were supposed to interview someone else and they didn't show. And she was actually the host that day and interviewed me. And I told my story for the very first time. And with her being in long-term recovery herself, she works at TOSA, the Other Side Academy. She said,
Mm,
"Oh, I was just watching stuff just meld off of you. You don't realize how much you're holding inside until you really start getting it out, I guess." And that's what I
yeah.
found out for me.
Yeah, I definitely had a lot to unpack when I was there. I've always had that mentality that I can quit when I want and nothing's wrong with me. It wasn't what I went through wasn't that traumatic. And to some people it might not be, but to me it was, especially at that age. And so, yeah, I think I had a ton to unpack. And also, I had a lot more trauma too outside of what happened when I was, a young kid. I had a lot of other crazy stuff happen way later in my addiction too that I had no idea was affecting me or that I was thinking about that. Once I was sober, I definitely had it all came spilling out when I was in treatment for sure.
Yeah. It's so crazy how our minds work. There's things that we bury that happen to us and we don't realize they're buried there.
Mhm.
And it takes a life-changing event or something happening to us to really cause that to surface. I was crippled when I was a kid and I had the like Forrest Gump brace on and a big platform shoe and my dad said I used to come home from school crying all the time.
Right.
And I don't ever remember that. I d- it com has my mind has completely blocked that out. I
Hmm.
just remember coming home from school like all the other kids coming home from school and then playing with my trucks, and I was 7 at the time, or I'd still ride my bike. My left leg would be straight out in front of me, and I'd pedal with my right leg, and,
Hmm.
yeah, and as even even as into my adult years with my anger issue, I didn't realize when I went through 6 months of therapy to learn how to control a very bad temper, how much crap I had buried in so deep, which when that fuse went off, that's why it was so short because all that stuff was coming out. But then I'd bring
Hmm.
it all back in and bury it again, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's kind of what happened to you. You'd kind of let it out a little bit and you'd feel good. And a lot of people that I know that first started doing drugs or whatever, I mean, they forgot about stuff. I mean, that's what got me on the cocaine. Went to a party,
Hmm.
snorted a line, and went, "Oh my gosh, I forgot about work for once." I didn't bring it home. I didn't think about it at a party. I was able to relax and have a good time, not realizing I was still burying stuff.
Yeah, I'm definitely right there with you. I am very great even to this day at compartmentalizing for sure.
Yeah,
Just put it away and not think about it ever again. And it's something even to this day in being sober that I have to work on, even from day to day stuff. Like I'm very upset at work. And I come home, I struggle to not just be like not sit there and break it down and think it out. Um, but yeah, I feel like at the start of my addiction, I didn't really do it to not think of those things, to not feel what I think at the time I was just free for the first time and it felt good and it just everything was fun and it made me social and I was just so much fun to be around at the beginning. And but I think as I kept using and especially as I got into opiates, I really think I used that to hide from those feelings and emotions and thoughts of trauma and everything for sure.
yeah, yeah. And those opiates, they take you in a whole different direction from what I understand from the majority of my guests. And I've been very, I guess I could say I was very lucky. I mean, in my time, opiates wasn't really a big thing.
Hmm.
Late 70s, early 80s. It was more, heroin or not heroin, but it was more cocaine, pot, hash, mushrooms,
Hmm.
and I remember in junior high, PCP every once in a while was kind of popping up. But later in the years, of course, when the Sacklers came out with the Oxycontin and stuff, I mean,
Hmm.
it changed so quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I still remember the first day, exactly where my opiate addiction started to the T. It was one of the very rare times I was out of weed. I was waiting to get more, waiting to hear back from my guy, and also at the same time I was out of meth. I had been probably I never was up for a long time when I was doing meth. I'd sleep reasonably, but I hadn't slept for a couple of days, I think, and so I was out of weed, I was out of meth, I was feeling like crap, and then like almost like intervention, kind of like divine or not, whatever the devil, whatever you want to call it. Looking back, I got a knock on my door, um, and I go and I open it, and this guy that I'd hung out with, he bought weed from me a few times before. He he asked me, he's like, hey, he just moved in and we hung out a couple of times. He's like, hey man, you got, like a 10 sack or 20 sack or whatever. And I was like, no man, sorry, I'm waiting to hear back from my guy, I'll let you know. And he looked me up and down and he's like, man, I must have looked like crap, because he's like, man, you look like shit, or are you okay? And I'm like, no, I'm out of everything. I just feel like crap. I haven't slept. And he just reaches in his pocket. He pulls out some tinfoil, unfolds it, and there's a blue Roxy 30 sitting on it. And he's like, well, here, try this. This will help you get to sleep. And he showed me how to hit it. I never smoked anything on tinfoil before. And I took it and I hit it. And yeah, I, again, fell in love, but even more so than the meth and the Adderall and the Vyvanse. I just immediately was just so happy, and everything in the world was right, and nothing could feel better than this. And it just, yeah, that I just remember that vividly, because from then on, that's when things really very quickly started moving downhill. Um, I mean, yeah, I, and the worst part was, especially with the Roxy codone addiction, it costs a lot of money. It's back then, especially. But I had a lot of money, and so for a long time, I was able to fuel my addiction for sure, and not think anything was wrong. Went on for probably 6 months, maybe getting closer to a year. I just was able to, I made a large amount of money from the weed, and I was able to feel that addiction, and never even got a taste of withdrawals. So I had no idea that nothing was wrong. I knew in the back of my mind that I shouldn't be doing that, and I heard things about withdrawals, but nothing really. I didn't really know it well. I didn't know it firsthand. Hadn't seen it. And yeah, the first day that my guy that I was getting them from, uh, I called him and he's like, "Oh, sorry, I'm out of town." Oh man, my freaking world came to an end. I went into I tasted full blown withdrawals for the first time, and yeah, I knew then that there was a huge issue, but instead of trying to fix it, I dove in. I doubled down. I messaged them and I'm like, well, heroin's the same, right? I'm like, do you have anybody in town that could help me out? And I vaguely remember him warning me. I think he's like, oh man, once you switch from this to this, there's no going back. And I was like, I don't care. I'm so sick. I feel so horrible. I just need this to end. And yeah, that's what I did. I went and I bought heroin for the first time. And again, just like the Roxy codones, it was, I loved it even more, right? Yeah, and that's definitely where my life for sure really very quickly started coming off the rails. Because with the meth, I didn't physically need it as much. I mean, obviously, I'd sleep for a couple of days if I didn't have it, but there was no real physical, uh, like real bad withdrawal to it, right? And yeah, I think with the opiate withdrawal, that's when the monster inside me really started to come out, because I would do anything, and I mean freaking anything, to not be dope sick, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so from there, like I said, around this time, so I'm doing meth, I'm doing heroin, still selling weed. And you'll have to excuse me because I've been to jail so many times. I think somewhere in there, I realized I had a bad problem, like, and I thought to myself, instead of getting treatment, instead of doing it the right way, I think I had the conversation with myself. If I don't have a money source and I'm not working, I can't afford the drugs. I'll have no reason, or I'll have no choice but to quit, right? So I actually stopped selling weed at this point. Um, And so then, of course, probably about that time is when I started selling some of my things here and there to pay for stuff. But I actually got contacted on Facebook by a very convincing undercover informant to sell him some weed. I guess Draper Police Department. I'd stopped selling for probably a while at this point. I guess Draper PD probably thought that I was still selling at the time, and so after some back and forth, me even telling them that I don't sell anymore, they went there. They basically convinced me to have my buddy bring some over. I made that very clear that I didn't have any weed, so I had my buddy bring it over. I even remember laughing. I said, "Oh, watch, now that I don't sell anymore, watch this be a cop."
Oh man.
I, and man, was I right. Oh
Yeah.
man, there was a lot of them too. I pull out. It was a snowstorm. I remember that vividly. And I pull into the gas station. And right as I was about to pull into the gas station, I got lit up by an undercover car. And I pull in, and I swear there had to be 9 squad cars, rifles drawn, 2 dogs. And man, they were treating me like I was some kind of high class criminal. I guess maybe in their eyes I was, Draper selling them that much weed. But yeah, they pulled me out of the car, shoved my face in the ground, and I went to jail. Like I'd been in and out before, just like little possession stuff, like in and released later that night. But this was like the first time I was in jail. And yeah, I of course, my main concern as I'm getting transported there wasn't that, holy crap, I have a rap sheet. Holy crap, I'm going to jail for real for the first time. I'm going to be around all these scary people. None of that, right? It was, oh man, I'm going to have to go through withdrawal in jail and lockup, and that's what terrified me. And yeah, so I got out, and the cat kind of got out of the bag with that one. Everything kind of came to light. My mom came and absolutely tossed my room at my grandfather's house. My ex, she ran over there and tried to hide some stuff and take some stuff away, but she did not do a good enough job because my mom absolutely tore me a new one. I want to, like, I kind of feel the need to kind of shout her out. She is an absolute amazing person. She has a degree in psychology. She's a psych professor. And she is a great mom, but I was very good at hiding things from her. I just don't want to make that kind of clear. But yeah, she came over and she tossed my room. Uh, and man, when I called her on the phone, she just unloaded on me. Um, and so when I got out, she's like, "When you get out, you call me immediately." And of course, I was so scared. She's the one person in this world, Al, that scares the absolute hell out of me. Um, and so I was terrified to call her. And so I called my ex. Of course, she came and picked me up, and immediately I was looking for the easiest way. I knew I had to do something, but I was looking for the easiest way I could possibly do it. And so I had heard of Suboxone and methadone, and so I started immediately calling or Google searching Suboxone doctors, methadone doctors, clinics, whatever. And so I get this whole thing um, brought up to her that I need, or I had this whole story basically, and I convinced her. And at the time, I didn't really know how bad either of those were, but I had this whole story ready for her that Suboxone's great, it's amazing, it has this amazing success rate. And so I asked her, I'm like, hey, if I agree to do this and do their therapy that they require, would you, pay for this? And she went for it at the time, not really knowing any better, both of us not knowing any better, right? And so life kind of got a little better for a while. I stayed away from the hard stuff. I was drug tested at that doctor that I went to, but I knew when the drug tests were, so I still would smoke weed here and there. I'd do some mushrooms and drink and everything, but I stayed away from the meth and the heroin, and that was in my head the only thing that mattered, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I skated by, like, life's good. I'm working. I have a decent apartment with the same girl. She's not doing anything crazy. And then one day, we just got a wild hair. you okay with cursing, Al? I forgot to ask.
Yeah, yeah, you're okay.
Okay, perfect. One day we just got a wild hair up our ass, I guess, and yeah, we just decided to go and pick up some meth. And again, in my head, I thought, as long as it's not heroin, and I remember saying that to myself all the time. As long as it's not heroin, that's the big one. That's the one you need to worry about. That's the withdrawals. That's, the life ender, the game changer, right? And so then it spiraled downhill for a very long time. Well, it took a while, but for a very long time, I was doing, meth and taking my Suboxone every day. Um, I'm trying to remember. Our relationship started to suffer. She was very susceptible to the meth. She was very susceptible to drug-induced psychosis. It seemed like even with a very small amount, she would start auditorily, visually hallucinating. And so that started to really affect our relationship. She would think that she said she'd look around the corner and see me sitting there with two women around each arm talking bad about her or something, right? When there was nobody in the house. And so eventually we broke up for a while. She went to treatment, came back, we got back together. And at this point, I had to move in with my mom. And so she would come up and see me at my mom's house. I had no car or nothing. My mom was keeping a close eye on me. And I remember she went to a wedding and ended up meeting who used to be one of my really good friends, and they ended up hooking up. And she just completely said everything is done. And I was very, very in love with this girl, and so my world came crashing down. I was very distraught. Um, yeah, I felt like everything was just over. Nothing. It was all pointless. Like I loved her so, so much. And so I think at that time I started breaking bad again, and getting stop using the Subox and getting back onto the heroin. And again, a lot of it's really blurry, so I know I miss a few little key things here and there. I think I left my mom's house, and was kind of on the streets for a little bit. Um, and I'm trying to remember the timeline. All is very, very blurry. So I think what happened is I got kind of in a fight with my mom. I left, kind of was on the streets, couch hopping, going from place to place, didn't really have anything. And then I ended up grabbing a job at a place, and my boss that worked there had a place for me to stay. And let's see, yeah. So basically, I got a place to stay, so I was off the streets, still using drugs, and at this point, I'm evading court, I'm evading probation, and I'm just getting warrant after warrant after warrant, and finally, I go to jail, or I get pulled over and I get arrested, and I have a lot of warrants, and so I do my first stint in jail. And I think it was like my first real like long stint, not just a couple weeks or whatever. I think I did like 4, 5, 6 months, something like that, Salt Lake County. And of course, like most people, I'm calling my mom saying, look, I'm going to change this time, I'm going to change. And it never happened. I got out, of course, and immediately went right back to it. um, Met this girl. We ended up moving in together, still working like temp jobs, just, classic person that's trying to support a habit job, I guess, just temp construction jobs, right?
Yeah.
And man, me and her were not a good match. We just fed off of each other. When I first moved in, she actually was sober. And of course, I very quickly changed that. Still feel horrible about it today because, to my knowledge, she's still out on the streets. Yeah, so that's one thing that I definitely deal with. Um, I
So
was,
let me ask you this real quick, quick, Stone.
yeah.
And I'm asking this question because this is the same thing that's happened in my life with my spouse. It's that
Mhm.
she told me every time she said that was it, she said she really meant it, that it was it. I mean, was it that way for you when you told your mom, hey, this time it's it, really, I'm done, I'm fed up with this life? Or was that because we all know, addicts can be very manipulative and they're really, really good
Yeah,
at it. And they know how to tug at our heartstrings. They know how to tug at our emotions. And my gosh, I heard it so many flipping times and I
right.
still believed it every single time
Mhm.
for a long time.
I think that when I said it at that time, being in jail, I'm very, I'm going through withdrawals. I'm very dope sick. I think at that time I convinced myself that I meant it, but man, the second they called me for roll up to leave, boy, that went right out the window, right? Um, I think my mom, as far as if she thought that I meant it, I think it's the same thing. I think for a very long time, I think a total I did 7 different real times in jail, right? And I think for the first couple, I think she once she knew what was going on, I think that she believed me because I was that was one thing I was very good at was being very sincere and manipulating for sure.
Yeah.
Um, and I think she believed it, but then after a while, she just was lied to and told something and ended up being the complete opposite so many times. She just started taking on the mentality of I don't believe you until you show me. Um, my last time in jail, which I'll get to, my biggest time in there. That's one thing that she kept telling me. She wouldn't even take phone calls. She wouldn't let me call her. She wouldn't come visit me. And the only way I could reach out was writing a letter or calling my stepdad. And the reoccurring theme, and she drilled it into my head, was just show me, stop telling me, and show me. So yeah,
Yeah. And I can imagine how hard that was for your mom,
oh yeah,
because when I've sat down and spoke with people and I've had people call me and asking for suggestions and advice, it's mostly their child. I'm like, this is a whole different sandbox. Mine's my spouse. It's a little easier. Anyway, it's my version of it. I think it's just a little bit easier when it's your spouse compared to your child, because this is your DNA. This is you, right? I mean,
mm-hmm.
you grew this human being, especially for moms, and to be able to shut that person out, that child that you love so doggone much, it's got to be very, very painful, very painful. Because I know it was painful for me just with my spouse. I couldn't imagine if one of my daughters fell into that realm of addiction, how hard it would be. And I just finally, just in all honesty, just recently last weekend, finally, even though we've been divorced, I've still been there to try to support and be there and help her any way I can. And I could start it. I was feeling it starting to grab its talons in me and starting to pull me back into it again. And I finally just had to cut the cord and say, I'm done. This is it. I've had to block her phone. I've had to block her on social media just just to get away. And it still hurts because this is someone I was
Mm-hmm.
with for 18 years and stood by even throughout her whole addiction. So I can imagine your mom was really being tough and being also intelligent as she is. I still can imagine it was pulling at her heartstrings.
Yeah, that's definitely something I've thought of a lot. Like I said, our relationship now is great, and I've always, even in my addiction, of course, I've always loved her so much, and she has told me a few times how tough it was, how she just wasn't sleeping night after night after night. She would cry herself to sleep. And I feel like, especially with someone with her background in education, man, she must have been racking her brain constantly, trying to think of what's the best way to approach this. I've tried this, I've tried that, I've tried everything I can think of, and I feel so awful thinking about it. I can only imagine how hard it was for her to just finally say, I've tried everything I can think of, and it was me just completely shutting her out. Nope, I'm fine. Nope, I'm good. Unless I wanted something, of course, right?
Yeah.
And then eventually she just was like, all right, I have done everything I can. I physically and mentally cannot keep doing this. You are on your own until you show me with cold hard facts that you are changing, not that you're going to change, that you are changing. And yeah, so it was tough for sure.
Yeah. Well, and you're still holding some of that in from what you're saying, and that's a whole nother journey for you too, right? To
Mhm.
to stay on that right track and not let these emotions and the shame and the guilt come back, because that, my gosh, our subconscious has a way of protecting us and doesn't know what's real, what's fake. It's there, and it knows when we're feeling a certain way, what to do to take care of it, because that's its job. And so
Right.
it's a long battle for everyone, in all honesty. I mean, when they say addiction is a family disease, that's no F and Y. I mean, it affects everyone, and it takes long periods, and it's still there. It's still in the back of the head, and it doesn't take much to shuffle that thing forward again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It really just tears families apart. And I mean, I don't mean to skip over my stepdad too, but I mean, he was right there with her. He's such an amazing individual to be right there. And I can only imagine with how much he loves her, like the amount of time and effort and energy that he put into supporting her. And I'm very thankful to him for that. But yeah, it definitely does. It's a family disease. I 100% agree.
Yeah. What do you contribute your success to of being sober or clean to this day?
Ah, man, what one super quick side note, with doing a lot, always wanting to do like recovery and get better. I always wanted to do that for everyone around me and not myself, right? And I still struggle with that. I will be the first to admit, I love to hear when everybody that's my support group says good job, but I've learned to do it a little for me now. I guess I just love the feeling that I get um, when I said that, like when I look in my bank account and I see more money than I've ever had legally before, when I have a reliable uh, transportation to work, when I have a great job that I can show up to, that they value me, when I can go up to my mom's house and have dinner with her and my stepdad and my girlfriend on Sundays. Um, that's what really pushes me and to keep going. Um, and man, like you could ask anybody in my support system, my drive has been unwavering these last 2.5 years. So my definitely my family, my girlfriend, I have a huge that's a huge reason, but mostly myself. I love looking in the mirror and seeing it's just seeing how great I look, number one, just in general, and then also how easy life is compared to where it used to be driving around and looking out my rearview mirror more than out my windshield because I'm worried about police pulling me over, right?
Yeah. Well, and the opposite of addiction, as you know, is connection, right? And when we can get those healthy connections, it really does help us in our journey. It's crazy, and especially when we can start loving who we are again as individuals. Because until then, we can't even spread the love to anyone else, whether it is a girlfriend or a wife or a husband or a mom or a dad or siblings, whatever it may be.
Right. I agree completely. You got like that is what I try to have been. I definitely repeated it in my head a lot. Is I have to help myself before I can help others. Because even in my addiction, like my addict friends and everything, I was always a helper, always trying to. I'd be the one to take the big risk to make sure everybody wasn't sick and all that stuff. I always wanted to help other people, but now that is one big thing that I drove into my head and had my counselors and everybody at First Step that I was working with really drive home was I have to help myself before I can help others for sure. So
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad that you put it that way. Before my ex-wife, she did go 2.5 years sober, which was great. She worked her ass off to get there, and I tipped my hat off to her because it was a long, hard battle for her. And you know, I remember hitting my knees, and I did a fasting, and this was right before she actually got sober.
mhm.
And after I was done with the fasting, the word forgiveness kept coming up, and I kept looking up the sky saying, Father, if you think I'm going to forgive her, there's no way. There is no way. I was also playing the victim as well because, I don't have money because of her drinking. She's supposed to be helping me with a job and she can't hold a job. And, everything was her fault in my eyes, through my eyes. And it took some time.
Mhm.
It really took some time before, I don't know. I like to joke around and say God finally slapped me upside the head like a good father does
Mhm.
sometimes and says, "Wake up." It was the forgiveness, why it kept coming up wasn't for her. It was for me. I had to
Mhm.
forgive myself for all the mean things I said to her, for the way I treated her when she was under the influence, because I didn't know how to act. I had no clue. I thought I knew addiction pretty well when really I didn't know even anything about addiction. Even though I
Right.
did my weekend stint for 8 years, I didn't look at myself as an addict. I lost my job because of it, a good career of
Mhm.
24 years. However, I still couldn't put it together. And once I realized the forgiveness was for me, that's when my path started changing. And that's when
Right.
it's crazy because that's when she started coming around to work on the road of recovery. And I was a better husband for her
Mhm.
at that same time while she was going through it. So we were really kind of going through recovery together, in all honesty, just in different ways.
Right. Yeah, that's an amazing way to look at it. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And like you said, we've got to forgive ourselves before we can move on and love ourselves before we can even love anybody the way we want to be loved. We got to love ourselves completely first.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. That
Yeah.
is definitely the one thing that I've been really driving home, uh, since I was in treatment and left. So I couldn't agree more.
So
Um,
life is pretty amazing for you right now.
yeah, yeah, it's going great for sure. After I went to jail, I did 9 months in jail. I got accepted into First Step. Fully had the intention of running, but immediately fell in love with it. Saw everybody, the progress they were making, even in such a short amount of time that I was there. And yeah, I ended up sticking it out. I was a house leader or ended up becoming a house leader at First Step. A bunch of fun responsibilities with that. Ran some classes, some activities. Just kept falling more and more in love with it. This whole entire time I was sentenced to drug court, so I was also working through drug court. Shout out to all my drug court people out there. You guys are awesome. Um, yeah, I just kept working my way up the ladder, working my way through my recovery, and I set some short-term and long-term goals, and just started knocking them out one by one, whatever it took. I started working back in construction a little bit, just as a temp laborer, just as to have income to make sure drug court was okay with what I was doing. Um, yeah, I started doing after I graduated. First Step, I did their LTRM, long-term recovery management classes. Did that for a long time. Participated in sober softball to kind of stay in the community. And then as I felt more and more comfortable out in the real world, I at this point I was getting close to graduating drug court. I knocked out all of my short term goals, and then started turning towards more of my long term goals, which my biggest long term goal I actually just officially achieved yesterday. So I'm pretty excited about that. But yeah,
Congrats.
thank you, I appreciate it. So yeah, I got a job as a temp laborer for a company called Kier Construction. And it was supposed to be just like a 3 or 4 or 5 day thing. And they ended up loving me, loving my work ethic. And I just started from the bottom of the barrel and got more and more and more responsibilities. And eventually they hired me on as a skilled laborer. And then as of yesterday, actually, I just got promoted to a salary position as a foreman for the company. Officially, I was doing a lot of foreman stuff before, but they sent the contract to me. Offered me yesterday, sent the contract to me today. So I'm super excited. That was my last long term goal, is to get solid salary position job that I could build the rest of my life on. In there somewhere, I graduated drug court. Um, yeah, I life couldn't be better right now. I couldn't be happier.
It sounds like it. So was your, who you called dad, your grandpa, where
Uh-huh.
was he at? Has he been able to see this whole transformation
Oh
with
my
you?
goodness. I got to admit, I'm a little nervous, so I was kind of skipping around a little bit. So backing up a little bit, after I got started getting into the meth and started in on the opiates and the heroin, he developed. Goodness, I feel horrible at the time. Again, if it was my grandmother, I could tell you every single little thing that had gone on with her. But when he got sick very quickly, and when that happened, I uh, I kind of ran from it. I was scared to go through that again. I was like, no, 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 no. And so I listened at the time to as little information, and I retained as little. But he got sick and very quickly passed away within a matter of like 2 months. And so and that's something that, because I love that man more than you could ever imagine. He stepped in and filled the role of father for me. Played catch with me, took me fishing, taught me how to shoot a rifle, drive a car, all that stuff. Um, and the last memories he probably has of me is in the height of my active addiction, and that's something that I definitely struggle with. So unfortunately, no, he didn't get to see any of that transition.
Yeah. Well, he sees it now. I mean, I'm just guessing. I'm a very spiritual person, and I do believe that certain individuals come back and see us where we're at. Because, and I'm just going off of my experience. I was very
Mhm.
close to my grandma and grandpa, two of them, and I got to know all my grandparents all the way up into my teenage years, which I'm very grateful for. Matter of fact, I lost my last grandparent when I was like 45 or 46.
Oh
So
wow.
I had my grandparents almost through half my life, and there's still times I feel them, like they're just right there. Sometimes I can even smell them, which is so crazy. And it's like, yep, grandma's close or grandpa's close. So I'm sure your grandpa is there, and he's looking over you, because we all need those angels to look over us to help keep us in the right direction. That's for sure.
Absolutely. I think you're right. At least I hope so. I really, me and him were best friends growing up, and he deserves to see me at what I am today. So I hope you're right.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Again, that's just my version of it, and I feel it pretty heavy. And a lot of the people that I hang with, they all say the same thing, and it helps all of us. It helps keeps us comfortable, I guess, knowing that we have somebody that's there that may have seen the worst of us or during a bad time of our life, but to have them, or to know that they are there and seeing us who we are today, that just puts a smile on our face, because the veil's very thin.
Yeah, I can agree to that for sure.
Yeah. So what are your plans now? I mean, you just hit a long-term goal, something that you've been working your ass off for, and you hit it. And again, my version is, again, there's always goals that we can set. However, when it comes time for working on ourselves, that is a lifelong journey. Because I think when it comes to working on yourself, there is no finish line. There is no such thing as a finish line. So where do you see yourself kind of going now? I mean, you've got your job, you've got a lovely girlfriend, you got your relationship back with your mom and your stepdad, you got your vehicles, a roof over your head. You've talked.
So sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, you've mentioned it quite a few times during the show that you just want to help others. I mean, do you see yourself maybe on a part-time gig doing some work for maybe a recovery center, or helping other people in their journey, or getting certified as a peer support specialist?
I have given that some thought. I will admit, with my career just starting, and it being such an important thing to me, I want to get a little more solidified with my work. But I have given that some thought. I've thought about being maybe a peer support guy, or doing an LTRM class here and there, working at just doing something. First step maybe being a guest speaker. But it has been something that has crossed my mind for sure. But being as that everything has happened. I mean, I've only been sober for coming up on 2.5 years, almost on the dot. And so I honestly have been working so hard. I haven't given it a ton of thought.
Yeah. Well, good for you for working hard. And and having that stuff in the background, because God has a way of placing us on certain paths at certain times when we're least
Mm.
expecting it. I did a talk up at the Park City Wellness Alliance about a month ago, and when I was doing my talk, I was telling the people in the audience, I'm like, I didn't choose this path. God chose it for me. Because 4 years ago,
Right.
if you would have said, Al, do you think you'd ever be a crisis and recovery coach? I'd probably start laughing, going, yeah, you kidding me? No way, not interested at all. Now all of a sudden here I am in April. I got certified,
Oh,
and
congrats.
even doing this show. I mean, I've been doing the show for over 3 years. We hit 3 years this past March, and again, I would have never thought that I'd be doing this show this long, and it's still going and still growing. And where life has taken me, really, really due to me losing my job due to a dirty
Mhm.
UA, and then my ex-wife battling her alcoholism, is what put me in all this, in all honesty.
Right.
And to see where things are at today, it just blows my mind, and the individuals I
Mhm.
get to hang with and be a part of, and call friends, really, really good friends that would take their shirt off their back to give to you if you was cold, and they wouldn't hesitate,
Mhm.
and I mean, gosh, now a co-founder of the Healing Utah Success Summit and the founder of ARC, the Addiction Resilience Collective Networking Group, and my gosh, it's things that I never even really thought where life was gonna take me, and then all of a sudden one day a new door opens up, which I believe that's probably what's gonna end up happening to you sometime down the road when the timing is right, and God knows when that timing is, another door will open for you. Not saying you're leaving your career, but another
Mhm.
something else that may pop in to take you in a different direction. Who knows?
Hey, I honestly, I hope you're right because um, I have a lot of interest in, and again, I love, like I said, I love helping people. And so if that is a path that I think, I think my next biggest long-term goal that I'm going to set is to be able to have my own place. I share a home with a few of my good friends. Um, but my next biggest goal is to have my own place and to start my family. But I could definitely see myself coming in and helping however I could in the recovery community. Because I mean, I went to an I've been absent for a while, and I went to a softball game, a sober softball game the other day. A few of my friends were coaching, and it just felt so good to. I'd been away for a while, and it felt so good to see those guys in there working on themselves and being that happy and having that great of a time, just good, clean fun. And I drove away with a big smile on my face. So, I mean, hey, if that door opens, then I'll gladly accept it for sure.
Yeah, good for you, man. Well, Stone, thank you for taking time out of your day, especially after a long day of work, and to sit down with me and do this show. One last question for you. What does the other side of addiction mean to you?
And that's a good question. Now, I think the other side of addiction to me means happiness, um, just a normal, mundane, boring life compared to what I came from, and that's all I could ever ask for. And just time with my family and friends, and just worry about normal stuff, I guess.
Yeah, I love it. Well, again, thank you for your time. I really do appreciate it. And thank you for being so open and vulnerable. It's a lot of our listeners and a lot of our guests that watch this show. I mean, they all know it's not easy to open up and share a part of your life that you're not proud of. And it takes a lot of resilience, a lot of hard work to get to where you're at. I mean, even to this day, and it's a continued battle, right? We will continue to
Mhm.
battle. And I'm just not even meaning the dark parts of us. I mean, life is tough anyway. We are all going through the battle in one way or another. And as long as we surround ourselves with good people and keep our head in the game and believe in the person above us, we can pretty much get through anything. So again, thank you for your time.
Yeah, absolutely, Val. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
You bet. Well, guys, again, thank you, all our listeners, past sponsors, guests, I guess I should say, our past guests, not past listeners. I hope everybody's listening. Anyway, just want to say thank you for all your support and all your love. And guys, again, remember, mark your calendars for Saturday, October 5th. We've got our fourth Healing Utah Success Summit at the Miller Free Enterprise Building in Sandy from 10:30 to 2:30. We've got some amazing speakers. We've got a whole new show. We're actually revamping this whole thing. It's going to be amazing. Check out the social media. My social media, Facebook. We just posted a video that we had done in St. George just a couple of weeks ago. We had a lot of fun doing it. We love you. We appreciate all your support, guys. Remember this: addiction is giving up everything for one thing, and recovery is giving up one thing for everything. We're out.